Both in cinema and in video games, it's always a sign of bad writing when the evil villain is trying to take over the world or when the hero is trying to save the world. In reality, what we tend to deal with are empires with reasonable, attainable objectives in their own immediately adjacent part of the world. When we look at the map surrounding Iran, we see that Iran is now facing off against two major rival empires. There's the Empire of Saudi Arabia, there's the Empire of Turkey, and in the middle there, we have Syria and Iraq, two countries that are incredibly weak at the moment, but could be strong in the future. And looking back at the last 20 years, Iran has in general been incredibly successful in increasing its power in both Iraq and Syria. And I'm highlighting here the road that connects Iran to the ocean over around Lebanon, where of course Iran has a client army sitting not so far from the border of Israel at all times. Now, that's not the only client army that Iran has. You've probably also heard about the endless wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I can't even really call them proxy wars, but Iran also has troops fighting on its side, especially in Yemen lately. So there's a real question here. There's a sort of great powers standoff between Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Up to this point, Saudi Arabia has been the client of the United States of America. Saudi Arabia has been the ally of the United States of America. I think it's fair to say that the greatest unknown factor here is to what extent Russia and China will move to stabilize this region as American hegemony declines, as the Americans withdraw their troops or just generally try to spend less money reshaping or dominating this part of the world. Now, if you look at the front page of China's own YouTube channel, CGTN, we have a remarkable array of propaganda statements letting us know in absolutely no uncertain terms that China now intends to form an alliance with Iran. The extent and nature of what that alliance will be, we don't know. But in any case, China will take advantage of the current nadir of American politics in the region to try to set up some kind of friendly and cooperative relations with Iran. It has become well known that Russia is playing a strategic role in Syria already, but I think it remains to be seen to what extent Russia will also formalize some kind of partnership, maybe with Iran, maybe with Turkey, maybe with both. Turkey is expanding its power in Libya. It's not clear if Turkey will contend with the other two great empires of this region more or less in the years to come. So with this review of very basic facts having been accomplished, let's just reflect on what Iran is and what Iran is now trying to accomplish. Iran is not trying to conquer the world. Iran wants to command and control that highway linking Lebanon to Iran. They are very interested in exerting power and influence and control over Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, so on and so forth. They are a regional power, and they are an empire of sorts. They're also very interested in advancing their really centuries-long struggle against the hegemony of Saudi Arabia. And I think Saudi Arabia has every reason to be afraid that if the United States does scale back or end its military and economic role in this region, Iran may suddenly or gradually become the most powerful player on this particular chessboard. If you think about this highway, this blue ribbon stretching from east to west, and then think about the enormous expanse of Russian territory, sort of running parallel to this highway, but further north. I mean, most of it is off the map, but Russian territory is poking down there around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea and so on. Russia also has a monumental task ahead of it in stabilizing the region. Now, stability is not nearly so glamorous and ideal as democracy or freedom. But Russia doesn't have a choice. Russia can't just pack up its bags and go home. No matter how evil we may regard this Russian mission to stabilize the region as being, no matter how we may look down our noses at Russia's strategic role in Syria, nevertheless, Russia has a very clear mandate to stabilize the region, and stability is something that 20 years of American imperialism have utterly failed to deliver. Very few people have read The Philosophy of Thomas Hobbes. I can say, as a matter of fact, that my own professors at the University of Toronto who taught the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, they themselves had never read Thomas Hobbes. Believe me, I'm in a position to know that. Hobbes is a very disturbing political philosopher for a young man to read. Obviously, when I first read this book, I was a teenager, and I could not relate to at all the securitarian hypothesis of Hobbes, the attitude of Hobbes, having seen the vicissitudes of civil war in England, that stability was worth more than democracy. He utterly laughs at the instability that the study of ancient Greek and Latin has brought into England with this ridiculous notion of democracy. Now, whatever he might have privately thought about democracy, publicly, he saw the terrible reality that lack of a stable government brought into people's lives. I heard an interview with a guy in Libya just on the normal news recently, and it was very moving to me because the guy said, having now lived through so many years of statelessness, civil war, just bad government or the absence of government, now, if he could travel back in time, he would have fought on the opposite side from the side he fought on in the Libyan civil war, the revolution, if you like, that created current conditions in Libya. It was very moving to me because obviously this is someone who used to be an idealistic believer in democracy and who is now, like Thomas Hobbes, an ashen, demoralized, pragmatic believer in stability at any cost. Now, what if stability means supporting a theocratic government like Saudi Arabia? What if stability means supporting the eccentric religious government of Iran? What if stability means a peace treaty with the worst examples of Muslim fundamentalist extremism in Afghanistan? Is that a price too high for stability? Well, I have to tell you something. I'm still an idealist. I still think democracy is worth dying for and is worth killing for. But people like Vladimir Putin do not think that. People like Xi Jinping, the leader of China, do not think that. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are quite willing to compromise and come to cooperative political arrangements with all of the religious fundamentalist dictators in this part of the world, any of them or all of them, for the sake of getting on with business as usual. They have no interest in killing and dying for the progress of human rights, secularism, atheism, science, let alone democracy. It's worthwhile to mention also that Iran has some democracy. If you were going to rate democracy on a scale from 1 to 10, I don't know if Iran gets a 4, but Iran is more of a real democracy than China. They do have newspapers that criticize the government. They do have elections and so on and so forth. Iran is very far from an ideal democracy. Nobody would compare Iran to Switzerland. However, nevertheless, Iran has a somewhat democratic political system, whereas China is an authoritarian oligarchy under the one-party control of the Communist Party, and Saudi Arabia is also a monarchy, a theocratic monarchy, if you like, but Saudi Arabia, on a scale of 1 to 10, Saudi Arabia gets a 0 for democracy. Maybe China gets a 1 out of 10 for democracy, and Iran actually is somewhat more democratic than these other countries. And the United States of America has the ultimate luxury of just going home. I don't know if one day before I die, it will be revealed who wrote the secret letter revealing that they would withdraw from Iraq. It would certainly be nice to know. This is a voice of dissent within the Trump White House, but what this letter says is what I'm sure many military experts in the United States are thinking. There was a vote in the Iraqi parliament. The parliament of Iraq voted to request that America just leave, that America withdraw its troops, America just go home. And the United States of America has the luxury right now of just accepting that offer, accepting that opportunity and saying, okay, we'll leave. Because when you look at this map of the world again, I've just described to you, Turkey has its objectives, Saudi Arabia has its objectives, Iran has its objectives, Russia also has some modest long-term objectives here. Okay? What difference does it make to the United States of America if Turkey increases in power, if Iran increases in power, if Saudi Arabia increases or decreases in power? America has everything to lose and absolutely nothing to win as the tides of empire go back and forth across this region. It doesn't really matter if you regard Russia's motives as cynical or pious. It doesn't matter if you regard China's motives as cynical or pious, both in terms of popular democracy and in terms of elite-level decision-making. The Americans have to look in the mirror and ask, what is it we're trying to accomplish here? What is it we're trying to win? Is it American national policy to promote Sunni Islam against Shiite Islam? And if so, why? Is it American policy to promote the power of the House of Saud, the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia, as somehow being better than the elected leaders of Iran and the just barely elected leaders of Turkey? Turkey is an incredibly corrupt democracy, but on paper it's just barely a democracy rather than a dictatorship and so on. What is the agenda here? In reality, if America remains in the region, they will gradually, at the cost of billions of dollars per year, simply end up adopting the same cynical posture that Russia already has of just trying to stabilize the region enough to be, shall we say, good for business. Human rights and democracy, sadly, are not the business that any of these empires are in. Not the Iranian Empire, not the Turkish Empire, not the Saudi Empire either.